Good early afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity. And I start to share my presentation, so I hope everybody can see it now.
We can see and we can hear you very well.
Okay, great. So good afternoon once more. And what I am going to do is to share with you a bit about what's happening in Czech Republic. And in fact, it will be what's happening on two levels. As it was mentioned, I am a member of Committee for Education of Governmental Board on Sustainable Development. And within this Governmental Board on Sustainable Development, last year, there was produced a paper or a publication on climate education, which illustrates some nationwide efforts in climate education. And then I will continue with example of one program involving schools and students in climate education as illustration of these approaches. So as you have heard, my presentation is named Climate is Changing and What About Us, which is at the same time the name of this publication, of this paper, which was produced by a working group, by a governmental working group on climate education. And the result of this work, the publication, is published now. It's published in hard copy. You can see the design of the publication, and it's published also on web page, Učím o klimatu, CZ. I learn about climate, if I would translate the name of the web page. And this is common web page of different organizations in Czech Republic dealing with climate education. So, and it starts to be, this web starts to be nationwide portal, nationwide web for climate education. At the same time, the paper, the publication is published also on web page of Ministry of Environment. There was a broad team around this work. You probably cannot understand all the names of institutions here, and you won't be familiar with the names, but I just want to illustrate that there was a team of something like 25 people from different organizations with different backgrounds, starting from ministries, going through universities, through non-governmental or specialized organizations focusing on environmental development, global education, up to teachers and students involved in Fridays for Future, for example. And there were also such professions like psychologist or psychotherapist. So the views were very broad, which were used during producing this paper, this publication on climate education. And of course, we reacted to what's happening in the world around us. So we react to the fact that the main challenge of 21st century is climate crisis. It's for sure more important challenge than economic growth or digitalization. That world already reacts to it, and it's on the way to climate neutrality to some extent. And this represents the huge social transformation. And if it should be successful, we can succeed only if also education will respond to it. And these trends are visible on international political level as well as in international scientific or expert debate. What can illustrate these two quotations? And so what happened in Czech Republic, that after 1.5 years of work in last year, there was produced this material which can be called white paper on climate education. So something what might be used as base for governmental discussion, for policy papers, for planning of climate education on different levels. And here is overview what's the result of the work. So there are some main recommendations, and I can say that these recommendations are on two levels. One level is on level of practice, so the recommendations to teachers, to educators, but the other level is recommendation on the level of strategies, policies. So let's say recommendations to decision makers. Then the publication describes what was already promised, what are the intentions in climate education, and what's the reality of climate education. Then it describes the content, the logic, the content and methods of climate education, so whole of climate education and different important parts of climate education. And then there is a very practical part which describes available programs and materials in Czech Republic on climate education, which also refers to references to literature, which was the source for the work. And of course, we reacted to surveys of public opinion or of environmental education results, of eco-literacy and so on. And there are some findings which to some extent were already mentioned in the first part of this conference. So what this survey says is that there are some strong and weak sides of the situation of climate education. So if these surveys show that pupils, students to some extent already know quite a lot about the causes of climate education. They know about how the problem developed. They even do, at least part of them do something, but mainly some simple things like saving water or sorting waste. But on the other hand, they don't know too much what can do more beside these simple things. Many of students are not actively involved. It was illustrated here earlier, also in parts from Polish side. They also don't search too much for information independently. They don't read too much about climate crisis, about climate education, and also very limited is talking about sharing their thoughts with parents or other actors. One very important finding which is reflected in this publication, and it's more general than only for climate education, that people seem to have environmental attitudes, or at least they proclaim environmental attitudes, but the pro-environmental behavior is limited. So there is something missing, that these environmental attitudes or pro-environmental thinking is not changed into the real behavior. And these surveys show that one of the most important, or probably the most important component, is something what is called locus of control. So it might be also described as that you are persuaded that you can influence something, that you can have impact. So this low level of belief that I can change something, I can achieve something, is one of important things to focus on in climate education, or in generally in education for sustainability, as well as in climate education. And more specifically, there are some specific challenges of climate education if compared with, let's say, more traditional parts of environmental education or education for sustainability. And these challenges might be described by these four areas. Climate change might seem as too far and slow problem. It might see as too complex and threatening problem. It might seem as too polarizing problem, And it also appears that the responsibility is too distributed among different actors, among different levels of society. This is to some extent generally true about different environmental complex problems, but with climate education, this is because of its complexity is even more important. And this, well, now I'll go to some already to some directions of recommendations in the publication. If you realize these challenges, you can think about how to react to these challenges. So there are some principles which are important for climate education, like that it's important to frame climate education as local and topical, something what's happening here and now, and demonstrate how we can react locally. So I think it's very relevant what was described here about Code for Green project, for example. But also because it's problem which is perceived as threatening problem, or problem which I don't know what to do. I feel too small to solve it. So it's important not to exaggerate the issue, not to increase the fear, because then it can lead to apathy. So to show the reality, be very factual. And also because there are different points of view on climate change, speaking about the results and speaking about the scenarios, how to solve it. So it's important in education not to polarize, but to build colorful coalitions and link it with different values and beliefs. What can help are ambassadors of climate education who are trustworthy to different groups. And regarding the aspect of too distributed responsibility, what can help, for example, is to show examples of good practice on different levels, starting from individual level, but going also to institutional level, like school, or going to local level, community level. What we formulated in these recommendations are some basic principles of climate education. It's to big extent the response to the previous slides. So you can see these 4 principles, which more specifically describe what to do if you want to be precise and critical, if you want to be close and tangible. So again, framing local issues as local and related to our own lives. It also, the 3rd principle also stresses that it's important to include social and emotional component, not only the knowledge, not only one half of our brain. And what's very important is to support active involvement, active participation, offer the possibility to experience that I can influence something, that I can achieve the success. And describing the climate education for teachers, but also for education leaders or decision makers, it seemed to us helpful to use model which was developed in Finland, which describes the climate education as a system, and its model of bicycle, which stresses what was already mentioned, that if it should work altogether, if climate education should work, it cannot be based, for example, only on knowledges, but also on skills to handle these processes, so with thinking skills, but also with hope and emotions and with motivation. So again, I go back to this social and emotional aspect. And every part of this bicycle is described in the publication, more specifically what kind of knowledge, what kind of emotions is important to work with in climate education. And based on this, there are some recommendations on the level of education policy on this, let's say, nationwide or regional level. And you can see these recommendations. So to state climate education as priority of educational system, but also to work with it as cross-curricular issue in national curriculum. So not to link it only with one or a few subjects, but to use it as opportunity to interlink different subjects. Very important is teacher support, consultations of teacher, mentoring of teachers, of course, training also of teachers, but also assure quality educational programs and materials. And not to forget for non-formal education or for public education. So besides formal system, to focus also on public education. And we in Czech Republic now are in process of revising national curriculum frame program for schools, and there are some first steps where we managed to include the climate education into the main direction of this Czech national curriculum. Then there is the level of recommendations for teachers and educators. So let's say recommendations on school level. And there are some aspects which are stressed as whole school approach, as connecting different disciplines, being interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary, as collaboration of teachers. Very important part of this is link the content of teaching with what's really happening with at school. So with real school greening or decarbonization of school, and engaging students, again supporting their participation in initiatives. And the other recommendation for teachers is to join school networks which deal with climate education, which I will come to soon to it in practical example. We also formulated some learning objectives of climate education, which focus not only on knowledge, but also on skills and attitudes. It's just example in Czech. I think there is not time now to translate it, but just I illustrated this. It's part of this white paper. And then part of recommendations for teachers is also where to find support. So we advise teachers different web pages, different publications, and also different ongoing programs. So you can see here 4 ongoing programs which are operating in Czech Republic. One of the program is international program Eco School. The other program is CO2 League, which is competition for school in decreasing CO2 production. The third program, I will mention more detail in next minute, is School for Sustainable Living, which is the program we implement as SEVER, as partner of this EUKI project we today share. And the fourth nationwide program is World School or Global School implemented by People in Need organization. So these are some offers to schools, which networks, which projects they can join to receive support. And what I want to to do as the last part of my input is to illustrate one of these examples, the program we use as SEVER, as Center for Environmental Education, SEVER. We have for 20 years program School for Sustainable Living, and we use its methodology now for handling with climate education. And you can see here some aims of this climate School for Sustainable Living. I probably won't read it, but overall aim is to give students chance to have the feeling that they can really influence matters in their surroundings. They can really influence what's happening in their community, in their locality from the point of view of climate change. So I think it's very similar to what was presented here in Code for Green, but a little bit different methodology. In this methodology, we have described 8 steps, but if I tell it very briefly using this slide. So in this project or in this approach, students first map problems and values of their community or their locality. Then they are visioning and planning action plan. So they dream what they would like to see in their community in few years, and try to prepare some plan of practical actions which can be implemented. Then elaborate one of these ideas to full project. So they do project planning, and then they implement some project which is beneficial for their community. And this is general methodology of this School for Sustainable Living program, but we applied it now to climate issues. So it's framed by local action plan for climate, and the projects are focused either on adaptation or mitigation measures. And probably there is no more time to be more specific with single steps of the methodology, but going through it just very quickly. At the beginning, we focus on this emotional and social side. So we work with motivation and also with understanding of every student what are his strengths and which can be involved in solving such issues, such problems. Then we go to the phase of mapping of the locality, of mapping of the place by different methods. So mapping what's happening in the locality. Then we go more deeply into understanding different issues in the locality, and then there is the phase of visioning and planning local action plan. When there is something like pool of project ideas, pool of actions which can be done in the community, then students try to evaluate and find one activity for their common effort. We work with the whole classes, so school classes are participants of this project. And what they do is that they evaluate the impact and the feasibility, and they try to choose project which is feasible for them as a school class and which has certain impact in the community. And then again, they research, they go more deeper into the issue, they plan the project and they implement the project. And of course, they celebrate and evaluate what they achieved. And there are different results of reflection is very important, evaluation at the end. And just to give examples, they do different, it's really up to them what topic, what project they decide to contribute with. But it might be project focusing on traffic, for example, supporting bicycle traffic or changing traffic behavior around school. It might be project focusing on lowering consumption of energy or using maybe photovoltaic for lightening. Or it might be project which helps with some adaptation measure, so to keep the water and change microclimate from the point of view of temperature. So these are different ideas which students took and implemented in surroundings of their schools, in surrounding communities. So that's very briefly description of nationwide debate and one example from Czech Republic. So thank you very much for your attention.